So we are now entering the roundtable part of this event. I don't need to introduce the speakers, but Professor Fehr, Sergio Ermotti doesn't need introduction in his native Lugano, and Professor Luigi Guiso. So the idea is that we are going to start a discussion here. Meanwhile, if you want to continue putting dislikes, or questions, we will keep track of them. Oops, and at some point, we will come to the questions from the audience and from the meter. Okay, so maybe let me start addressing some of these questions. So the first thing I would like to start talking about is the role of leadership. And how does leadership shape and defines corporate culture and corporate values? We have seen 3 different types of values. This could be functional, moral, and ideological, but maybe let's dig more at the beginning to the functional ones. So the first question is for Sergio Ermotti. When you first became CEO of UBS, it was 2011, right after the financial crisis. Did you have to change the corporate culture at UBS? And how did you manage this change?
Well, actually, at the end of the day, it was not really about changing the culture, but restoring the culture. Because when I started and in the early stage, we were confronted with a lot of confusion in respect of what the bank stands for, what people externally and internally thought their added value to society and to shareholders in general was. So what we had to do is to really analyze exactly where we were coming from and where people would collectively unite around certain concepts. So in a sense was more about reorganizing our thoughts. And the way we did it is by simply trying to visualize in the organization. For example, many of you may know our, the logo we have, the 3 keys. And so we started to say, well, maybe we should try to explain what the logo stands for and reflect this into the organization. So we ask, starting from myself and a couple of my colleagues in the executive board, but also going bottom up with new people joining the bank, 200 people at different levels in the organization, asking them, what do you think we stand for? The only thing I predefined was, were 3 items. So pillars, so pillars in terms of how we do things, and the principle on how we do things what we do in the organization, what we do in the organization in terms of how we manage the business and how we look at services, but also the behavioral part of the equation. So where for each of the 3 items you would reflect at this dimension into a key, one of the key. And very easily, so that people would understand, it says, in order to have success, you need to unlock the door with 3 keys. If you only have 1 or 2 keys, you won't be successful. And so what we developed was, for example, the first key was the pillars. So we knew that capital strengths, this was the outcome of 200 people working, capital strengths for the bank was a must. Efficiently managing our cost, our resources, was a must. And risk management was a must. So was the entry point. Without that, you are not in banking. Okay? The second one was client focus, sustainable performance, not only in our financial performance, but delivering businesses and services and offerings to clients that would, over time, sustain their own merits. And the third one was how we deliver all this. So the behavioral part. So the second was the principles, and the third was the behavioral part. So collaboration, challenge, and all of that in the early days was a reflection of, you remember, post the financial crisis, of a necessity to also get people to understand that speaking up when they see something's going wrong was a must, because it was the first element. You know, many of the issues that we experienced, but also the rest of the banking sector, in terms of behaviorals of people, was a reflection of people. Many people in the bank knew, but nobody dared to speak up. And that was a very big issue. So challenging if you see something's wrong, speaking up when you see something's wrong. So as time went by, and I'm concluding, of course, we couldn't really live with a culture in that sense, or set of operation that was defensive, only managing risk or speaking up when something was wrong, but rather starting to speak up to make ourselves more successful, more competitive. And therefore, over time, this has evolved into something that is now much more embedded into the way we work every day in the organization.
So it was going back to the values.
Yeah, the values, and really some of this where you call it the functional one. So as I said, you know, in the first in the pillar, you know, is a functional value. In banking, if you don't have a strong capital, if you are not managing your risk, you know, that's you can't be in business, right? So over time. So, but then the second one, you start to go into a more hybrid zone, if I can say, right? So you start to really go into the quality of how you do things, clients, because at the end of the day, what we also try to communicate is that I do believe that at the end of the day, when shareholders, clients, and employees are happy, they need to be at the same level of happiness or equilibrium. The likelihood that you're going to do something good for society is very high. So, and this is the real issue, that where we say through taxes, through the way you give services, and you're being a good employer, and so on and so forth. So over time, we have been reflecting all these elements as we developed an understanding around those items. But I have to say, these things were embedded in 170 years of history. And they were popping up as we were searching for our own identity.
It's a good story. Okay, let's maybe, I would like to ask a question to Luigi. So you have done work with your co-authors, and you have explained or shown the relationship between corporate culture and first performance. I have this touch, sorry. And you talked about it during the talk. Now, one of the values that you brought up in your work is honesty, right? And this, you know, has an effect on the return of stocks. Now, how do you measure these values effectively? Clearly, there is a need for measuring these values, but at the same time, what are the right metrics for everybody, in a sense, to go and measure and see these values?
Thanks. I think the point that I made in the presentation is that you know, there are two sources. One is look at what firms report and declare in their
workers. You mean?
Now, let's start with the firm, because that is the easy source. You know, you go to the website of the company, and typically there is a section, you know, our values. And then you can say, okay, this is the list of values. What I was arguing is that, you know, this source is obviously biased. Like, you know, asking people, how do you feel in terms of honesty, I would say I am super honest. It's obvious. I want to look good. So measurement is a super important issue. But to give you just an example of how important what is the distance between what is proclaimed and the actual underlying behavior, look at Enron. In 2001, Enron went bankrupt and out of an accusation of fraud. If you look at the lobby of Enron at the time, the values that were printed in the lobby were integrity, the first one, communication, honesty, and so on and so forth. Clearly, there was a distance, a big gap, actually, between what Enron was proclaiming and the actual behavior that was inside the firm, that was guiding. Now, there is a better way. I mean, as Ernst was mentioning in his introduction, it is difficult to measure the values that prevail in a corporation. That is definitely true. There is no easy statistical tool. But looking at what are the perception of workers is one avenue, in the sense that the workers know the firm. Insiders, they know a lot. And as Bruno was mentioning, you were saying that when you were restructuring UBS, workers knew, but were unwilling to reveal, were unwilling to report. But they knew. So if you find a way of interviewing workers in the proper way, you can get a pretty good picture of the prevailing culture in the company. So this is what companies like Great Place to Work, which is a company that ranks corporations and firms in terms of attractiveness as a good place where you want to spend your career. They interview a sample of workers and get a sense of what they think about the integrity of the management and other dimensions of culture. And those are reliable. And when you use those measures, you see that actually, companies that do well in terms of workers' perception about integrity, they do well in the market.
Good to know. So we can go and look at these indices and try to divide the different corporations and at least take a look. So I would like now to move to Ernst Fehr. So your work has challenged the vision that professional norms affect risk-taking by employees in the banking sector. So in this light, if this is true, so what is the role of professional norms and corporate culture in the banking industry?
Let me say two things. First, on measurement also, because you never ask somebody, are you honest? Oh, what's the answer you get? It's clear. But you ask others about other people. So that's the trick. So basically, you ask people in a group, not about their own honesty, but what they believe, let's say, the integrity of the others is. And then you get really good answers, typically. And there are other tricks of the business where you can get around these social desirability biases. Now, when it comes to professional norms, I did not show that they are not important. What I showed in one of my work is that we were interested in the question whether we did research in several companies, and we were interested in banks, and we were interested in the question whether there is a reckless risk-taking culture. So we were interested in a bad aspect of culture. And what we found is that this was not the case. So, but that does not mean that norms are not important.
I just say that.
Yeah, I think my whole work is, so to speak, dedicated to the point, to the question, and to showing that these norms are really ultra important. So, I mean, what are the drivers of behavior? We have legal drivers of behavior. So we have legal limits, but many people don't even know the concrete legal situation. So they have limited impact. Then we have financial incentives. We have social incentives. And then what's left? I mean, there is this big domain of behavioral standards, normative behavioral standards. What am I expected to do? What do people expect I ought to do? And this ought component, what we really should do, it plays an extremely important role in companies, and companies can foster that. And that's actually, for example, I really listened up when you said that challenging or speaking up. I think this is one of the most important things in order to make norms operative, to make them effective. Norms are sometimes silent, or they are kind of not having their grip on behavior to the extent that people don't speak up. But when they speak up, and that is an important message, you have to induce them to speak up and to make that itself a norm, to speak up. Speaking up should become itself a norm. Then you can have a leverage over people's behavior that is very high. And you can steer the behavior in a direction that the company wants the behavior to have. You can steer the behavior towards the common good of the company.
And how do you do it practically? Because, I can imagine how speaking up is good, but could be seen negatively by your colleagues.
Yeah, it's exactly.
So how do you incentivize without punishing, I guess, no?
Actually, there is a very efficient way of proceeding here. So the first thing, when you want to establish a normative behavioral standard, so you want to get people doing something that is good for the company overall, then the first important ingredient is that people have to be aware of the fact that value is created. This is the functional aspect. It's not always clear that people understand that, or that everybody understands it, that certain behaviors are value increasing. But if you make clear that they are value increasing, when the overall value of the company increases through certain behaviors, then there is the potential that everybody can benefit from that. The pie is bigger, so each one can get a bigger share of the pie. And of course, when you want to implement a norm, you have to make sure that your compensation system is indeed constructed in a way that they get a share of the bigger pie. Okay? But that itself creates normative illegitimacy. Making the pie bigger for the company by creating, for example, more value for the customers. That induces many people already, I would say 70, 80 and more % of the people are already induced by this knowledge to go in the direction of that behavior, okay? But not everybody. You always have minorities, you have heterogeneity. And then you need the important point of speaking up. And what we typically do when we install a positive corporate culture is we make speaking up itself a normative standard. This is an obligation. So if you see me not living up to the norm, it is your obligation to say, Ernst, you put your hand on my shoulder, you're friendly to me in the first instance, and say, Ernst, didn't we just last month agree that we do this differently? And you say it in a very nice, friendly way to me so that I can accept it. So there are ways to speak up without hurting the people, and that is what's called clever communication, and that is something people also have to learn. And if then you observe me the second time I don't follow it, well, you may have a different tone in your voice the next time and say, you may have forgotten, or, but, and so on. So we have tools, but it has to become a norm itself to speak up and to give feedback. But that is difficult. It doesn't come from alone. You have to, we call it feedback culture. You have to establish a culture of giving feedback and the feedback has to be staggered according to the degree of deviation from the first order norm. And then you can be, we have done this in many companies already. You really can change the company's culture in that regard. So.
Well, maybe
anything,
if I can add on this, because, right, the way we do it, not only we, I guess, many firms, we do have survey, employee survey, every year, asking basically 90% of the cases the same questions, so that we can track trends across the board. So we ask people to opine on some of the topics Ernst just mentioned. And we have KPIs to follow not only the quantitative outputs, financial results, but also the qualitative one around client satisfactions versus employee satisfactions, and so on and so forth. So we have measurements that we keep it in mind. So when we do that, de facto, you create another channel for speaking up. Because when people, for example, have to opine on, is your boss open to feedback? So, of course, you can put a bias. People want there to opine no, but believe me, when you go outside, you start to have statistical relevant numbers, you can see a deviation from different people or the industry norm that allows you to come to certain conclusion. For example, the fact that we had our last employee survey, we had 77% of the people in the bank filling the survey. It's not mandatory, but 77% did it. Now, you all know how many people go to vote for political elections. So we have 77% of the people do that. So the other issue about speaking up, if people don't dare to speak up, you open channels in which they can do it on a confidential basis, either internally through HR or people who are fully dedicated to that, or external channels where they can do that anonymously. So you can create a lot of instances in which just the fact that people feels protected, they can speak up. Now, nothing is perfect, but at the end of the day, we have to also recognize that businesses in general, not only banks, have done a lot over the last few years to try to embed those kind of behaviors in the right way. And also when you speak about compensation and promotions, I can assure you that the how dimension, how you do things, it's a big chunk of the decision if you get paid or if you get promoted or not. That's very important.
The how, okay. Many of these things actually are happening even in universities, it's, even, we tend to be a little bit reluctant to change, but.
We know it.
Anyway, I would like to talk about corporate values during a period of change, rapid change or radical changes. So, for example, during expansion mergers, like the one that UBS had with Credit Suisse, even during leadership transition. So how difficult it is to maintain a coherent and positive culture, and what are the strategies that help organization, and here the question is for Sergio Ermotti, to preserve these values and cohesion even during these difficult times of probably bringing together different institutions, different corporations, which may have somehow slightly different functional values.
Well, concretely, I can talk about what we did in the most recent by the way, something that many people maybe don't know in the room, but the UBS of today is the outcome of 520 acquisition. So, I mean, 170 years, different banks coming together, then eventually coming into UBS. So the topic of integrating different businesses, people, cultures, not only in Switzerland, from all over the world, was always a topic over our history. So this last chapter is a big one. It's the first time two very significant, important financial institutions on a global basis comes together. It happened to be two Swiss banks. And therefore, I can tell you that, you know, despite the perception or the many talks that you hear, I can tell you that we have many more things in common with the vast majority of the people at Credit Suisse that we have that in this agreement. So in that sense, it was a challenge because, you know, in the early stages you can imagine, the people were shocked, were angry, were disillusioned about anything. So that was the most important issue, was not really to try to convince them that they needed to change their culture. It was more about trying to get them to, you know, still be committed in doing something. So, but concretely what we did, we shared what we stood, you know, our principle, the pillars, the principle and the behaviors. We created groups of people at UBS and Credit Suisse together to talk about what it is, how we do things. So really coming top down, going down in the organization, group of people working together and understanding each other about how we wanted them to embrace or understand what we were doing. It was not an indoctrination exercise, but since you used indoctrination as a...
quotes, I forgot the quotes.
No red booklet too, but in a sense, we basically tried to really make them comfortable about our operating model. But one thing I have to tell you that large organizations, and you know, it may sound a little bit strange, but I can assure you that large organizations, 80–90% of the people, they want to be led. They want to know what the place stands for, and they are happy to follow and implement. So the real issue was to also make sure that we, top down, would let them know exactly what we want and how we want them to behave. And I can assure you that today, if I look at the results, you can see we are making very good progress in the integration from a technical standpoint of view and everything that is not so important tonight. But what I'm very proud of with my colleagues in the board is that today, in September, 84% of the employees, of the 77% that answered, are proud to work for UBS. 83% of the people says that they would refer UBS as a good employer. And now, this is the outcome of UBS and Credit Suisse people together, where the ranking, you know, basically the survey done by Credit Suisse in 2022 was showing numbers around 50% to 60%. So you can see that we have some observation points in which I can say that by getting people another one important item we did last year, the first year of the integration, 2023. At the end of that current year, every single employee of Credit Suisse was subject to our year-end review process based on the UBS standards. And that made them feel like they were part immediately of UBS and not call it a second-class citizen. So it's a series of small things that happen that allows you to develop this kind of momentum. And but of course, it's a journey. You need to continue to invest and make sure that people feel the tone from the top. I mean, at the end of the day, people are watching up and look at. I'm asked to do that. Is my boss doing the same? And the one above, is it doing the same, yes or no? And if the answer is no, then they're going to start to go their own way.
Yeah, role models. Leaders have to be role models. That's absolutely key.
So no, so in a sense, is it a story of not compromising, or?
Look, you know, we not compromising on certain items.
On okay, so
on certain items, when I speak about you know, risk management, when I think about, you know, conduct and behaviors, is a red line. This is the line. You can't go above this line. And depending on how severe is the offense, it may lead into severe consequences.
Okay.
So people have to be very clear. But, of course, you know, integrating doesn't mean to basically say that everything we do or we have been doing was right and everything they have been doing was wrong. Actually, it's not true. But, for example, from a practical standpoint of view, I think people understood why we had to make a choice of saying UBS processes, UBS IT is going to be the one to be used. Not because necessarily everything is better. Actually, it's not necessarily always better, but it's the only way to go fast and to achieve the restructuring goals we had, because we had to basically restructure the bank. It was losing billions. So we had no time to discuss about perfection. So we had to go for 85% is right, let's move. So, and then we're going to fine-tune the rest. Actually, we now, in one of our area of the bank, we took out all the best practices of Credit Suisse that we believe will be helpful in the future. We put them into a fridge, right? And say, once we are finished with the integration, we have to open the fridge and integrate these things into our own processes. But now, there is no compromise. We need to do. So, in that sense, yeah, you have to draw lines from time to time.
I would like to ask a question to Luigi and to Ernst on a slightly different topic, which is toxic corporate culture. So, of course, no companies has a toxic corporate culture, but we do know, I mean, Luigi, you said that in your talk, that toxic corporate culture is the reason why 62% of the people say that they leave a company. They point to this. So maybe, I don't know if Ernst or Luigi want to start first. What are, if you're a leader and you see that there is a toxic corporate culture, how do you deal with it?
You want to start?
Well, yeah, in the sense that I can say I don't know.
We are academic, right?
I think probably you should be the person to ask how to deal with the toxic corporate culture. You know, but anyway, for a leader, I think it's not easy. I mean, in the firm you have a bunch of tools that you can use. You can fire people, for instance. So if the toxic environment, if the toxic workplace is due to the presence of a bunch of individuals, you can definitely use that lever. Which typically is what is done when you know, a company gets disrupted and the environment becomes, and you can replace it with workers that are more aligned with the new principles that we want to establish. Clearly, you have to state them what they are, convince people that you are serious. in this sense, I mean, the leadership becomes, and the credibility of the leader and the commitment of the leader becomes essential in situations of this sort. Because everything hinges, the capacity to fire is easy, but the capacity to attract is much more difficult and only hinges on the credibility and the commitment of the leader. So, in situations of this sort, really, you need a super reliable and trustworthy person that has a very high reputation and has the ability to build up a new team. Then, once you start, I think it's easier. If you're able to attract, let's say, 3 very good guys, then all the others, can follow. There is definitely, you gain credibility in the capacity to attract and to change. But the starting the process, I think, is the most critical and difficult thing. And my impression is that the credibility of the leader is
key.
Yeah. So if you want to build up a new university, for instance, if you are Einstein, it's easy. Every top researcher in physics is going to follow the call by Einstein. If you are a middle ground, it's much more difficult.
Well, I think every group has a tension, and in every organization there is a tension between individual self-interest and the interest of the group. That's never perfectly aligned. But what we do with a good culture is we align it. With good incentives, we align the interests. But there are sometimes individuals who can mess up everything. I mean, I was department chairman of the Department of Economics for 16 years. And I mean, I have a much smaller organization than you are leading, but I made the experience, a single professor can mess up the whole department and can make people unhappy because he sends emails around and sees everybody, and he is never satisfied with what he gets. And there are individuals who are just troublemakers. And we have a harder job here at the university because some of these individuals have tenure, so you can't fire them. So a private organization can fire these people, which is a good thing, that this opportunity, okay. But clearly there are troublemakers, and that a single troublemaker in a team of 20 people can create a toxic atmosphere. That's clear. But then I think more often it's the case that when there is a toxic culture, it's a failure of leadership. It's a failure of the leader being aware even of that, And you have to
step in.
You have to understand that there is such a culture, and some leaders are just not, some sub-leaders in this team of 20 people may not be up to their position, and then you have to replace the leader, or you have to teach the person. But we have tools to measure. We have tools to measure the toxicity, and the survey that you do is a very good tool to measure this. And then the goal, I always come back to the issue. Then in the end, what you want is, you want the group to be functioning, and a functioning group is a group that creates a collective output that's good for the group. And at that level, you establish again the right behavioral standards that are necessary to implement the collective goals of the group. And you do this again with implementing the right social norms, speaking up. It's always the same message. With the right, of course, financial incentives play a bit of a role, but I have the feeling that they are overrated in this context. It's much more important the behaviors, that the concrete behaviors are defined. What is desired behavior? It has to be crystal clear what is desired. And then people have to understand that they all can benefit from following this desired behavior. And if they understand that, you have already many people voluntarily following you. And then you have a few ones left, they may not. And there is where you need some mild to less mild sanctioning mechanisms, interventions.
Maybe, look, when you look at toxicity, I mean, something is not becoming toxic overnight. Yeah. So it's a process. So at the end of the day, what we try to do when we see people, behaving the wrong way, acting in the wrong way, you go through, you try to get them to change. So at the end of the day, it's all about change the people in sense of helping them to change, or change the people, allowing them to go. Right? So it's really about that. Right, so they need to know, and I can imagine how hard it can be if you have to. I mean, thanks God we don't have to keep people we don't want, or the people that are not behaving, because this is very toxic. Because there is nothing, worse than, in my point of view at least, than having in any part of society. It's not only a business issue. Meritocracy not being the driving force behind how things works. So, and this is one of the biggest issue, in my point of view, we have nowadays in our society. That's too many people are sitting in positions just because they are there, and regardless of their merits, and that at the end of the day creates frustration and the wrong incentives of other people, because you mentioned financials and so on. The worst things, in my point of view, when people aim at positions or a return on ego. It's not return on financials and promotions. Yeah. It's ego. And that's the worst things you can have in a big organization, when egos goes beyond.
Come in the way, yeah. So I'm going to start opening the floor to questions, and while we get organized on the floor, I'll take a question from the one that have been sent, and the question is the following: How do you make sure that the values of young workers and older workers? Sorry, I closed the question, so now I have to find it again. What would be your advice on how to conciliate young employees' values and those of older ones? And this goes a little bit also, if I can add, the fact that younger employees are now putting value for themselves on more flexibility, capacity to work from home, and how perhaps older employees have different views. What is your advice? And the question, I guess, is for Sergio Ermotti.
Well, I guess what we do is, through surveys, we do segment not only by business unit, geographies, different kind of portrait, but we also look at generational, right? So people are asked how long you've been in the bank, what kind of age brackets you are, and we know without, of course everything is anonymous, but people do offer a way for us to explore these things. We also use more and more the section where people write comments to try to extract information that goes beyond, right? The survey that is pure, box ticking. But the issue is we try to also find a reasonable way. For example, by the way, things around values and so on and so forth, they are not just young people. I mean, a lot of people in the organization do care, and maybe the sensitivities and the way they speak about is different. But believe me that different generations do care about certain items that are important for society. Now, for example, on the topic of work from home, it's not easy to have young people pretending to stay home 5 days a week and then being culturally integrated. Or to say, come and work here and learn some things. Well, how much can you learn if you stay in front of a screen 5 days a week? If you don't come to the office. So there has to be a little bit of a common sense going through that, because particularly in our people, yeah, of course, our raw material is capital and software and so on and so forth, but the biggest one and the most important one is people.
Human capital.
Human capital. And if people don't talk together, we are not simply the sum of each single 130,000 people. We are more than that. So if people don't talk together, don't work together, at the end of the day, there's no way we can have a culture, but there's no way we can also present ourselves in a coherent way to our clients.
I think face-to-face interaction and personal interaction is non-substitutable to a large degree. I think you can a little bit go in the direction of flexibilization, but not in a company where people have to work together. I mean, it's partly different in academia, but even in academia, you want to have people attending. For example, when people attend a presentation on Zoom or on Teams versus a presentation when they are present, their alertness, their attention is much more vivid. They are much more alert when they are present. Because when you sit in front of the computer, what do? There comes an email here, maybe you are tempted to, maybe it's just not that interesting that minute, and you get diverted. I mean, it's just, that's how we are. And we lie to ourselves if we don't recognize that. So I think I am a big proponent of having more attendance, more personal interaction, because that's and establishing a culture via Zoom. How would that go? I mean, it's completely impossible. You know, all these also the way we encounter ourselves. You know, I can see your responses from your facial expressions that you make when I tell you, let's say, a plan for restructuring. I get so many more social signals what you think, what my ideas are, whether they are good or bad, and it's just more constructive.
Still flexibility, but with of course contact and the possibility of interaction.
The primary focus on, I would have a primary focus on attendance, and then a secondary focus on allowing for a flexibility to a limited degree.
If I can add just one thought. I think, I mean, there is on this issue, so two issues, young and old, and then preferences for, you know, working at a distance or in a more flexible way, and, you know, interacting with your colleagues. The two are correlated clearly, because it is typically younger generations that have a strong preference from working from home and from having a much more flexible work environment, like, you know, working 4 days a week, perhaps in a more concentrated way. Now, my impression is that there is not a single rule for every company. You know, very much depends on the nature of the business. And there is also a lot of heterogeneity in preferences, even among the young. And some of these people, they fully understand that in certain jobs, you know, you cannot do without social interactions and direct exchange of opinions and working together next to each other. So, for instance, in you know, even in computer intensive environments like at Google, you know, people go to the office because they have a strong incentive to learn from the others, and they're young. I mean, so I think there is scope for rematching between workers and firms, depending on preferences and the type of technology that a particular firm needs to rely on, which is what we've been seeing after the pandemic. You know, there is all this resorting of individuals across jobs, the great resignation, people that have been quitting and going and searching for a work environment that is more that is closer to their preferences. Why the pandemic? Wow. I don't know, but we learned that there was another instrument that potentially can allow you to work. I wouldn't be so, I think it's a matter of adaptation, and then we'll live in a world with many types of businesses. Some will work, 5 days all in the office. Some others will work at a distance, and individuals will match according to their needs and preferences, I think.
And each part of the world has completely different dynamics. Believe me, in Asia, everybody's back in the office.
Yeah.
And in the US is a completely different picture. In Europe is also not homogeneous. So there is also a very strong cultural influence on this topic, right? So and also for many people, of course, if you have a big apartment with different rooms, you can work from home. For many people, honestly, staying at home was not really an option. So I mean, you saw very quickly people coming back to the office. So it's but the cultural element is also very important. So the way young people behave in different parts of the world is not homogeneous.
So let me take a question instead from our digital board, and actually it is about how digitalization has influenced corporate culture in the last years. Or, for example, let me chime in. How has the application of AI, which could possibly replace a number of, there is this fear that the use of AI may replace human jobs. Does it affect the way in which corporate culture, how does the leadership ensure that this is actually embraced by the employees, for example, of UBS?
Well, I don't think technology should be feared, but, by the way, for banks, but for everybody. I remember starting as an apprentice, and still buying and selling securities and doing FX transaction through a telex. I remember, with a great level of enthusiasm, the first time I saw a fax machine. So so if I look at how banks are now developed their businesses over the years, digitalization technology has dramatically changed the way we operate. And still, we are here. Now, artificial intelligence is just a new frontier on how to enable us and our people to do a better job in a more efficient way. In many cases, we will create different jobs, other disappears, like we saw in the last 50 years. So, of course, in a moment like this one, people are fearing that potentially artificial intelligence is extremely disruptive. But, the tendency is always to exaggerate how fast it will come and underestimate how big it will be. And honestly, when we spoke about this topic with people in the organization, and we were trying to assess a little bit how to help them to understand that embracing technology was making their job more stronger, I think it's starting to resonate. Now, by the way, if we don't implement artificial intelligence or new technologies, we have a big issue, because we have a demographic problem. So in the next 10 years, only in Switzerland, 500,000 of people will retire. We have limited immigration and workforces. So if we don't enhance productivity, and by the way, in Europe, we have a pretty low level of productivity. So if we don't embrace new technologies to make ourselves more productive, we have a structural issue. So I do think that people will understand that over time, and as we deploy out technology every day, we just announced, for example, that we're going to give 50,000. We bought 50,000 licenses of Copilot. Is the largest deployment of Copilot with Microsoft in the banking industry worldwide. And people are starting to experiment on how to use it and make their day-to-day life more easier, and then over time is going to change their lives.
We just had a conference 2 to 3 weeks ago on artificial intelligence, organized by the UBS Center, and we had labor market experts there and other experts. I think it will greatly enhance productivity. We will see large productivity gains, and there are several studies there that show that in particular the less skilled workforce benefits particularly from artificial intelligence. It makes them more productive. It's not the case that it's the big. It will not be the case that it's the big job killer. Quite the contrary. I think there are reasons to believe that artificial intelligence complements the workers and increases the productivity of workers, and that means they are become more attractive for firms. So labor demand may even increase due to artificial intelligence. It may be the case that certain subsections of society, certain professions, certain skills, they may be no longer that necessary. For example, people who translate. I mean, I put things in ChatGPT and it gives me a really good translation. So people who translate, they may become superfluous, but how many people in society do translation as a professional job? I mean, it's more all the others who can benefit from using these tools, and I think there's a big opportunity to make them more productive.
So we have to take the last question because we are running off really late, but let's take the last one from here, and there will be opportunity to ask questions directly to the speakers and to the roundtable speakers during the dinner.
I have a very fast question. Do you think that the widespread use of artificial intelligence will increase the importance of soft skills, or will it decrease it?
What? The importance
of soft skills.
Yeah.
Oh, soft skills.
Well, I mean, from my standpoint of view, emotional. When you talk about leadership, is a combination of technical skills and emotional skills. So, it's very difficult to see how this is going to disappear from our modus operandi of everybody. So, in a sense, actually it may become even more important to differentiate, because no matter how things are going to develop, now I'm not an expert, but I do still believe that human touch will make a big difference in what we do and how we do things.
Thank you. It's relieving to hear that.
There's actually a secular long-run trend that increases the importance of soft skills, of social skills. It becomes ever more important. And I think it will become more important when you basically get rid of you solve many problems with artificial intelligence now. That creates more space for soft skills to play a role.
Fantastic. On this positive note, we don't learn soft skills necessarily from ChatGPT, but maybe also from other human interaction. I would like to ask all of you to give a round of applause to our roundtable. Participants, thanks again to the UBS Center for Economics in Society. Thank you, Professor Luigi Guiso, for your really interesting presentation, and we invite you all for the dinner in the foyer, and we look forward to see you again in our Aula Magna at USI. Thank you very much.